Hey bros, have you ever met a real life Lolita girl? No, I don't mean a lolly, like, please, Oni-san, fill my prepubescent asshole with your seed kind of girl. I mean a girl who's into wearing those big Lolita frilly dresses, doing her hair in big bouncy curls, and making herself look like one of those creepy dolls your grandmother keeps on her bed, but it really makes you shit yourself because you swear the fucking thing is watching you. The girls who dress like pick related. Well, I did. I happened to date a girl like that in my high school career, and if you care to hear my story, then come and join me in this thread. Gather around and prepare for laughs, boners, and feels. I'm not a very fast typer, and I'm still kind of emotional about this, but if you bear with me, I've got a long tale to tell. I pre-typed the beginning, around 8,000 characters, just to get us started. And if you don't believe me, that's quite alright. I don't care. Keep the fucking Sherlock Holmes analysis to yourself. I know this to be true in my heart, and that's all that matters. As I sit here and get drunk and reminisce about the days of old, I find myself wishing I had someone to share these memories with. Also, if someone on here lived in or near my town, they might recognize some of these events I discuss, so please don't dox me. My story begins as you might expect. I wasn't the hottest kid. I was vaguely chubby, not fat, but I could stand to lose about 20 pounds, with a stupid face. I was also a bit of a brooding emo loner, so I wasn't exactly a popular guy. I wasn't a virgin, not technically. You see, I had an older brother who liked to rail my ass and make me suck his balls and swallow his jizz. He was sent away and sentenced as an adult when I was 12. When he got out, he got heavily into drugs, and he moved in with a 60-year-old and died of a drug overdose, but that's not really related. You know, people always say that if you were sexually abused as a boy, you grow up to be a faggot. In reality, it was the opposite. I had a lot of misplaced anger for gays and trannies, something I still struggle with to this day, and I certainly didn't find men even remotely sexually appealing, nor did I enjoy being in sexual scenarios when I was submissive. In essence, no. I didn't become a fag or a trap. Not that there's a difference. We moved after the debacle with my brother because my parents didn't want me to deal with the stress of all my peers knowing. They were good people, my parents. My dad was a hard-working man and my mom was a hairy Italian with bigger balls and a bigger mustache. When I first started high school, I was friendless. It was a small town, and everybody had already made friends. It didn't help that I felt really uncomfortable and unable to relate to people. Luckily, in my first class, I ended up sitting next to a boy named Jacob, who would later go to jail for molesting an unconscious girl at a frat party. You know that feeling when your sibling does something really shitty, and you know they deserve the ridicule they get for it, but you still stand up for them because seeing people talk shit about them breaks your heart? Well, that's how I felt with Jake. He wasn't an evil guy, he was just lonely, on drugs, and too horny. Sex fueled loneliness can drive a man crazy. I firmly believe there should be therapy for loneliness, and that therapy should involve a hooker session as part of the treatment. Jake made a comment about how our homeroom teacher looked like a frog. It had me in stitches back then, even if now the wording of his joke escapes me. I remember I agreed with him, and in that moment, a friendship was born. Jake was no saint. In fact, he was kind of an obnoxious prick, but he was a loyal friend, and I cherished every day I spent with him. The first day of our school isn't just burned in my memory for that reason, though. It was also the first time I ever saw her, Elisa Milicent Sinclair. Even the name felt like something that didn't belong in our era. I didn't see her during my lunch, but I did see her in my last period class. I was sitting near the back, alone, not paying attention, when I heard a murmur coming from the room. I looked up, following the whispers and stares, and saw the most peculiar creature I had ever seen. For a brief moment, I wasn't even sure if she was a person. I studied her with immense curiosity, like a cat being introduced to the new baby. She was short, with pale blonde hair styled in ringlets, red, rosy cheeks, and porcelain skin. Her hands were white as snow, and she seemed so delicate. And despite it being a relatively warm September, Elisa wore a pink Lolita dress, complete with a cute hat. I didn't understand why, but the other kids found her extremely creepy. The girls especially didn't like her. I later learned that they just thought she was snobby and an attention whore, and that's why they picked on her. I remember gawking at her shamelessly as she found her seat, near the front row. She respectfully took off her hat and waited for the teacher. What a strange girl. That's what I thought to myself, woefully ignorant of my own quirks. Woefully ignorant of a lot of things. Truth be told, I didn't talk to her on that first day, or that first week. But every time I saw her, even if it was just in passing, I stared. She wore all manner of Lolita dresses in a wide variety of colors and messed her hair up in all kinds of styles. She was the type of girl who made sure no 2 days were the same, and I was the type of guy who took comfort in a routine. My routine was simple: wake up, eat, hang out with Jake, go to class, eat lunch, go to class again, stare at Elisa, go home and play Nintendo 64 games, and do my homework and chores, have my evening shit, and then go to sleep. It was a month into school when I began to notice that the girls were picking on Elisa. They made rude comments about her and talked shit about her loudly as she walked by. They wrote things on her desk. They ignored her when she spoke and were flat out cruel to her with their words. As much as I would love to tell you that the bullying never got to her, the truth was that it did. One girl, as Halloween was coming up, came up to her and cornered her at her desk and loudly said, "So, on Halloween, are you going to dress up as a normal girl instead of a creepy doll?" I could see the look on Elisa's face then. While the bullying had always seemed mean to me, that was the first time it had hit me that what they were doing wasn't just fun and games. She looked down at her feet as the girl belligerently pushed her for an answer, and finally when she whispered, "An angel," the girl said, "Wow, that's a really stupid costume," and walked away. People laughed. I didn't. Elisa didn't. She just gathered her bags and walked out of class, and I thought to myself in that moment, an angel costume would look pretty cute on her. I wish I went after her. I wish I told her I thought that. I wish I told her how beautiful she always looked in her dresses and how cute her rosy cheeks were. I wish I told her how cool I thought it was that she woke up every morning and did her hair and makeup perfectly. But I didn't. I was just like everyone else, and I forgot about it and moved on. Elisa didn't forget though. Halloween rolled around and she didn't dress up as an angel. She just wore one of her normal dresses. That day a girl said to her, "Nice freak costume." Oh wait, that's just how you dress every day. My bad. Even after that, I still did nothing. I honestly didn't even think about it too much. My friendship with Jake was slowly paying off, and through him, I made a couple of other friends. Jake got a girlfriend, a cute Polish chubster with huge knockers. I remember Jake showed us a picture of her tits on MSN Messenger, and we thought he was the coolest guy on the entire planet. The first time I ever spoke to Elisa came after that, and I'll never forget it. It was after school, and I had a library book to return. I wanted to get in and out as quickly as humanly possible. It's not that I disliked reading or that I particularly hated libraries. I was just in a rush to get home, back to my games, and back to my routine. Routines were comfortable. When I followed the routine, nothing happened. Wake up, eat cereal, go to school, go home, eat dinner, play games, take a shit, go to bed, and repeat. When I broke my routine, I ended up with a sweaty cock in my ass or stinking jizz on my face. But my routine broke that day. I saw Elisa in the library. She was doing the opposite of what I was doing. I was returning a book, and she was searching for one to take out. I saw her looking around the aisles, confused, scanning row by row. The Dewey Decimal System apparently eluded her strawberry-scented head. Oh yeah, I remember the smell of her conditioner or shampoo or whatever the fuck very well. I remember the scent of her perfume. I can even smell it now, as if she were right in front of me. I approached her and my curiosity stirred. Something about her cute, slightly frustrated expression piqued my interest, so I approached her. I did something completely out of character for me. I walked up to this strange, doll-like, fragile-looking, peculiar creature, and I said one simple word, a word that probably changed my life forever. I said, "Hey." That probably doesn't mean a lot to you, but you have to understand, I wasn't one who took comfort in talking to people. I was a passive teen who didn't like approaching strangers. I was someone who took comfort in routine and the familiar. To talk to a stranger, even a classmate, was rare, and to this day I like to think that somehow we had a connection in that moment. Somehow, something not of this world decided to link us together. Maybe it was God's plan. Maybe some elder being thought it would be fun to watch. Or maybe it was just fate. Or a chance. But I said hello to Elisa. She looked back at me with a queer expression, as if I were an alien. She was probably bracing herself for another barrage of verbal abuse, but I simply asked her if she was looking for something. She explained she couldn't find a book she needed for her other class, and we looked around together, though the name of the book escapes my memory today, so I offhandedly mentioned that there would likely be a copy at the town library. Again, another destiny-altering sentence from my lips, and then she looked me right in the eyes and said, "Where's the library?" I explained to her where it was, and her nose wrinkled. I knew I was getting nowhere. As it turned out, Elisa was absolutely hopeless when it came to directions. She couldn't read a map. She wouldn't even be able to manage a bus schedule, let alone crappy directions given by a 14-year-old. So after a frustrating 10 minutes, I threw my hands up and said, "Forget it. I'll just take you there myself." So I did. That day she was wearing a black and white dress with a bonnet, if memory serves. I remember feeling really awkward walking beside her. People stared at her as we walked, and I became somewhat scared and embarrassed being seen with her. She was the uncool girl, after all. But when she started talking, suddenly it wasn't so bad. She had a cute sing-song voice, and she asked me about the book I was returning. I told her I liked to read, but that book in particular was boring. We talked about books, and we found we shared a common interest in both books and video games. Now, you have to understand that a girl playing video games in 2016 is normal. A girl playing video games in the N64 era was fucking weird. Girls didn't play games, boys did. So I was delighted to have somebody to share my love of gaming with. We talked animatedly, and I found myself very comfortable around her when she spoke. I suppose in hindsight, it was partially because I felt that with the world's attention on her, I was comfortably invisible. It's like taking a pee when someone is taking a loud, obnoxious shit. You don't experience bladder shyness because you know that nobody knows you exist while the fucking windbreaker's in the room. But I digress. We reached the library and I helped her find her book. Nothing too exciting happened there, but when she finally checked it out, she gave me the most beautiful and genuine smile I had ever seen. It was the kind of smile a mother gives her newborn baby, the kind of smile a homeless person gives when you hand them $1,000, the kind of smile a father shows the doctor when he says, "We did it. Your son is going to be okay." She looked at me like I was the best fucking thing on the planet, and it made me really happy. It never occurred to me why at that moment, but the truth of the matter was that Elisa wasn't simply used to being treated like a human being. The next morning, she thanked me again for helping her and asked me my name. We exchanged names properly, as we had been technically unintroduced up until that point, and she went on her way. Jake and my other friends appeared, and they grilled me about what doll girl wanted, and they talked about how weird and creepy she was and how they thought she was ugly and annoying. I wish I could say I stood up for her, that I told them to fuck off and I said how beautiful I thought she was, but I was weak and desperate to fit in, so I bowed my head and I agreed. Yeah, she's so annoying. I remember seeing her walk into class and turn her whole body towards me to smile and wave at me. I remember feeling like the worst piece of shit in the world when I looked away and didn't wave back. She was the uncool girl. If I hung around her, they'd target me too, and I'd lose my friends. God, I was such an idiot. Elisa talked to me for a bit after class, but I shamefully brushed her off. I wasn't bullying her, I told myself. I wasn't being cruel. I was just protecting myself. I told myself that to cover up how ashamed I felt. She got the message after I repeatedly brushed her off every time we talked. I remember she was excitedly telling me about a book when I saw my friends, and I cut her off mid-sentence and said, "Sorry, but I'm kind of in a rush." I remember the heartbreak all over her pretty face as I walked by, casually laughing with my friends. I was in no rush, and she knew it. She stopped bothering me after that, though we occasionally stole glances at one another here and there. Our freshman Christmas dance rolled around, and I took some slut to it. After the dance, I went to a small hangout with Jake, his girlfriend, 2 other guys, and another girl. I took my date to the basement to have sex with her, but despite being sober, I couldn't get it up. Being raped and molested played hell with my boner. It didn't seem to want to get hard when I needed it to. The girl, sexually frustrated, went off and touched herself, and afterwards, she never spoke to me again. The year continued on. I changed my routine somewhat. After school, I started bringing Jake over, doing my chores and homework after dinner rather than before. Jacob and I were thick as thieves. I remember he always talked me into doing some asshole shit, like one time we camped out by the highway and threw rocks at cars, or we would fill up water balloons in the winter and throw them at people. But eventually the snows melted and spring break started to approach. Spring break began, and I got up to all kinds of shenanigans with Jake. I had a blast with him. He called his girlfriend one night and we made fun of her and called her mean names. Then he broke up with her. I remember we laughed for hours about it, but thinking back, I wish I could tell him, "Hey man, that wasn't cool. I know you didn't love her anymore, but she's still a person." I wish I was mature enough to regret hurting that poor girl. On one of the last days, I went for a walk to the store to buy some junk food, and as I was passing the park, I saw a familiar face. Decked out in a frilly pink dress complete with a cute umbrella, the pretty Elisa sat in the shade of a large tree reading a book. I approached her and said hello, and asked if I could sit with her. We talked like old friends. I completely forgot about the store as we both chatted on for hours. Finally, I felt my stomach growl, and I turned to her. "Are you hungry?" I asked. She nodded shyly. "Want to get McDonald's?" She said she didn't have any money, so I offered to treat her. We walked together and we went into McDonald's. It was kind of dead. We got our food quickly and sat down to eat. That's when I asked her about her dresses, inquiring why she wore them all the time. She explained to me how Lolita fashion worked and how making clothes was her hobby. She said half of her dresses were homemade and the other half were bought from specialty stores. She explained the makeup to me, and I genuinely found it interesting. But then some of the girls from our school came in, and my heart sank as I saw them pointing and snickering. The cruel embarrassment returned, and I made up an excuse to leave as quickly as possible. And out I went. And when school returned, I went back to ignoring her. I always justified myself in my own mind, but I knew what I was doing was awful. I remember there was a change in her after that. She never really seemed to be a happy person before, but all of a sudden she missed a few days at school, and when she returned, she seemed straight up depressed. I felt bad for her. One day, nearing the end of the year, she went to get food from the cafeteria, and she never did that. I later found out she seldom ate more than one meal a day, so looking back, she probably didn't eat the night before. As she was walking out, one of the girls made a big show of purposely pushing Elisa's tray into her. She just stood there. Jake sat beside me, and he was howling with laughter, but I slapped his arm and told him to stop. He looked at me, and I looked at him. Don't, I told him. It's not funny. Elisa's dress was ruined. She dropped her tray and looked down at herself, and she just calmly walked away, but I knew by the quiver in her shoulders that she was not calm. Something came over me. This isn't right, I said. Jake said, it's just a doll girl, dude. But I told him the truth. Elisa wasn't a bad person. She was a nice girl, and that girl was being a huge bitch. Jake nodded. He was a lot of things, but he was a loyal friend. Yeah, man, those girls are bitches. I told him I was going to check on Elisa, and he gave me this serious nod. He understood. Underneath his asshole exterior, he knew. He got it. Sometimes I think he was envious in that moment, jealous that I was brave enough to follow what my heart was telling me, but other times I think maybe he thought I was being an idiot. But that didn't matter. I followed Elisa just in time to see her go into the girls' bathroom. I waited outside, looking like a pervert for a good 10 minutes, but just as I gave up and began to walk away, she slipped out and wandered down the hall. I followed her to the stairwell by the football hallway. It was near unused during school. She was sitting under the stairs, hugging her knees and crying. I walked over to her and asked if I could sit with her. She immediately wiped her eyes and tried to show a brave face. Wow, I said, that girl was a real bitch. I can't believe she did that. Is your dress going to be okay? I already knew it wasn't before she shook her head no. I'm sorry, I told her. I asked if she made it herself, and she did. She said it was her newest one, and her grandmother was so proud of her and really loved it. I felt terrible. And finally, I said it. I told her that I thought the other girls were being idiots, and I told her that I thought her dresses were beautiful. Finally, a small smile stole across her face. Really? She said pathetically. I nodded. I pointed to her dress, and I asked if there was any way she could make another one. She sniffled and said, maybe. I asked her if she wanted me to help her, and her face lit up, and she said yes with such unhindered excitement, and sensing it was appropriate, I gave her a hug. I remember how tightly she clung to me. I remember how she smelled. I remember how surprisingly large her breasts felt pressed against my shirt. She gave me her address and asked me 100 times if I'd be able to find the place. I won't lie, embarrassment set in, and I was very close to just not showing up. You see, she went home after lunch to change. Jake reminded me I didn't have to go. He said, she's crazy, man, and she's weird, but I went anyways. It was an old house, not in the best shape, and kind of small. When I rang the bell, I heard the sound of somebody running like their life depended on it, and she threw open the door with a great big smile on her face. Anon, she shouted. I was worried you might have gotten lost. Come in. She was excitedly talking a mile a minute, offering me 1,000 different things, but I wasn't paying attention. You see, Elisa wasn't wearing one of her dresses. She was wearing pajama pants and a thin shirt, with her surprisingly long hair tied in a lazy ponytail. I have to admit, she was pretty fucking hot under all of that Lolita gear. She had big boobs, a nice round ass, and she was pretty thin. When I saw a picture on the wall, I understood where she got it from. Her mother, from the pictures, was as sexy as 40 as the hottest 19-year-old porn stars on earth. And those boobs, man, if she turned too fast, she'd kill a man. Elisa once told me the women in her family all suffered from chronic back pain. It didn't surprise me one bit. Gravity is a cruel bitch. She gave me a fancy tea and freshly made cookies that she baked just for me, and I met her sweet little old grandmother. Granny Sinclair was an old woman in body alone. She jumped up from her couch with surprising speed and greeted me with a warm hug, telling me it's so nice to finally meet me. She went on a rant about how Elisa always talked about me and how she was so happy and relieved that Elisa was finally able to make a friend, and I remembered feeling absolutely disgusted with myself as this kind old woman graciously showered me in adoration just for talking to her granddaughter like 3 or 4 times. I wish I could say I was a big help with the dress, but I contributed nothing but moral support. Still, Elisa seemed content to do it herself, and her grandmother was very happy, shamelessly shipping us, suggestively saying she'd give us plenty of alone time. I mean, you know you're golden when Granny gives you permission to bang the girl. If you're wondering, no, I didn't. But we did talk a lot, and we officially became friends. I still brushed her off at school, but after school, I sometimes went over to her house and we talked and played video games and took pictures. She was starting to get into photography. The guys all made fun of me. Even Jake ragged on me a little, but he was more playful in his banter. I look back on the way he was, and I realize now that he was playing a role that he thought other people wanted from him. He wasn't an asshole because he particularly enjoyed it. He was an asshole because that's the kind of people he grew up with, and I think he was deathly afraid of being an outcast. In that respect, he and I were kindred spirits. Despite my efforts to keep my friendship with Elisa on the down low, people started to make comments at my expense here and there. It was around that time that I started getting into sports, particularly basketball. I would play after school with the guys, and Elisa made a habit of watching from afar. I think she realized my friends gave me shit for her, and she wanted to try to make it easier on me. I found it so sweet, I really did. After we played, I would go to Elisa's house, sweaty and gross, and we would happily spend hours together. I often ate dinner at her place. That became my new routine. Summer came, and I began to lose weight and shape up from playing sports. I wasn't a real looker, but my body went from meh to actually pretty decent. With summer, my relationship deepened with both Jake and Elisa. Jake got a new girlfriend that summer, and he and I talked a lot about women as a result. One night, I asked him why he asked Carly out. He went off about her ass and all that, and I sighed and said, okay, but seriously now, why did you ask her out? He sighed and he dropped the act and said, because she makes me happy and I love her. I thought a lot about girls that summer. I saw Elisa more and more, but didn't really think of her as a woman, and by that I mean I didn't really think of her as somebody I could date. I didn't know where she sat in my heart, only that the place I did have for her was warm and beautiful. Her birthday was in July. I found out 2 days before when her grandmother mentioned it offhand. I racked my brain thinking of what to get her, and eventually I decided on getting her some extra supplies for dressmaking. I knocked on her door early in the morning and asked if she wanted to go to the park, and before we left, I handed her the gift. I wasn't smooth about it. I didn't even wrap it because I'm a fucking tool. She didn't care though. She smiled, tears in her eyes, and hugged me tightly. She meticulously sorted my gift in with the rest of her supplies, proclaiming to her grandmother how happy she was. Granny Sinclair looked at me like, nice job, kid. We went out and walked around and got lunch together and sat down beneath a mighty tree in the afternoon. There, she rested her head on my shoulders, and I remember thinking, God damn, I am sore from sitting like this, but by my honor as a man, I will not move a muscle. Finally, she raised her head, giving me an opportunity to sit in a manner more forgiving for a boy of my proportions, and she looked at me. She admitted how depressed she'd been from the bullying, and she told me how after spring break her parents died. She trembled and said how sometimes she hurt herself to feel something other than emptiness, and how I was the only person who could make her feel really happy inside. She turned beet red and tenderly placed her hand over mine and mumbled something. I shyly told her I couldn't hear her, and she said, I love you. We sat in silence awkwardly for a long time. I thought about a lot of things in that silence. She looked away from me, and I just pulled the pin on my heart and unloaded all of the pent-up things I felt for Elisa. I told her how I thought she was cool and pretty and all sorts of things, and she stared at me in disbelief. She argued with my compliments, coming up with arbitrary reasons why she wasn't pretty and why she was a loser, but I shot them all down, becoming more adamant in my declarations until she hugged me and began to cry into my chest. I held and cuddled her there, under that tree, for a long time, and things felt right. I've lusted after girls before, but Elisa was my first true love. She was someone my heart yearned for. She apologized for crying into my chest, and I reached to her and brushed her hair from her face. And as my fingertips rested on her soft, silky cheek, I became incredibly aware of how close her face was to mine. I became very nervous, sweating profusely, and I felt my heart thumping so hard in my chest I felt it was going to explode. She gently touched my cheek and brought her face closer. Just this simple motion was enough to make my penis more erect than it had ever been. Those moments lasted a lifetime, and finally, she took a deep breath, leaned in, and shivers ran through my entire body as her soft, perfect lips pressed against my cheek. Her face went ruby, and I was too shy to push for more, but an hour later I walked home and we held hands the entire way. I told Jake about the entire encounter the next day, and he laughed and called me a faggot. I admitted to him that I was scared of what everyone would say, and he said something that will stay with me for the rest of my life. He looked me in the eyes and he said, "You like this creepy doll, bitch." I nodded. Then fuck everyone who isn't her. Why the hell should you care? If you're into that weird shit, go for it. You're struck gold being a fucking weirdo. Nobody is ever gonna mess with your shit. Lock that girl down and go be fucking creepy together. I remembered this speech word for word, even to this day. So I went to Elisa's house and asked her to be my girlfriend. She cried when she said yes. We shared our first kiss in her bedroom 2 weeks after that. We were alone, cuddled together on the bed, pressed into the corner. We had a blanket over us and my arm was around her, and she was in her pajamas. I remember us watching a movie, and during the credits she nuzzled into me so cutely and kissed my cheek and said she couldn't move. She was clingy in the sweetest way. I looked at her and touched her cheek and said I didn't want to move either. And we looked into each other's eyes, hearts beating, and I swear it played out like a movie. She puckered her lips and closed her eyes, bringing her face close to mine. I gulped and slowly leaned in, closed my eyes, and pressed my lips against hers. We pulled away and stared into each other's eyes, both blushing furiously, and we just melted into each other once more, kissing again. I think nostalgia is making it sound a lot better than it actually was, but I do remember thinking, wow, kissing is amazing. And kissing became our routine. We kissed very often, and just as I brought to her life the joys of routine, she brought spontaneity into mine. I was quite embarrassed the first few times she did a random house call. My parents grilled me about her and were very judgy about her attire. Ultimately, though, they found her polite and sweet demeanor to be quite endearing, and they warmed up to her. By the end of the summer, I was finally able to say it. We were out around dusk, sitting on a hill overlooking a playground. I placed my hands on her hips and told her I loved her more than anything else in this world, and I meant it. She cried, and she said it back. She told me meeting me was the best thing to ever happen to her. But then school came back. School had long heard the rumors, so right from day one, the bullies were on us. They called us freaks and asked me when I was going to start wearing dresses, asking me if I was her Ken doll and stupid shit like that. But it was constant. The bullying took a toll on our relationship. I started avoiding Elisa at school, and in return, she felt very upset and unwanted and started avoiding me. A month into school, my friend asked if I finally dumped the creepy bitch. And that's what woke me up. No, I hadn't. Elisa was my girlfriend. Did I not promise to make her happy? Did I not promise to protect her? I remembered Jake's speech about how I shouldn't give a fuck, and I found Elisa and demanded she go on a date with me. I took her out, treated her to a movie, and took her to the park, where I apologized profusely for how I'd been acting. I was finally growing up a little. She didn't cheer up at my apology, though. She started sobbing. "It's all my fault," she said. "I'm so sorry. It's because of me that they're hurting you. I don't deserve you. I'm just a worthless freak. I deserve to die." Hearing those horrible words come from her delicate lips brought tears to my eyes. I hugged her tightly and made her promise that she would never die, because I couldn't live without her. I made her promise that she wouldn't die. I made her swear it. Eventually, she settled down, and from then on, I endured the abuse and kept Elisa by my side with pride. In doing so, I found a certain strength in my heart. People were so cruel, but it didn't even matter. The good, that was Elisa, outweighed the bad. I started inviting her to spend lunch with my friends. The guys were dicks at first, but Jake laid down the law. He said, "This is a non's girl, and if she's a non's girl, she's our girl, so fucking treat her like it." They all warmed up to her once they got to know her, and she even hung out with some of them after school when I was busy, though it made me very jealous. She always reassured me, though, always earned my trust with her loyalty, and more things happened. The girls were harassing Elisa and I as we were walking to the lunch table, and Jake just happened to overhear. He called them whores and told them they were ugly fat hags who were ragging on another girl while pretending they were hot shit, and basically put them in their place. One of their boyfriends got in his face, but the teachers broke it up before it got physical. In the end, things began to settle down. The bullies relented, and Elisa began to finally have a place at school. Her grandmother adored me. She constantly went on about how great I was. Granny Sinclair was as in love as Elisa. The time for the winter dance came around, and I took Elisa, while Jake took his new girlfriend, and we ended up having a great time. It was after that Jake asked me one time over video games. He asked me how Elisa was in bed, and I admitted we hadn't done anything other than kissing. He looked at me the way you look at a meth head on the subway and said, "What the shit? Why? She's not spreading them?" I got a little embarrassed, but he just said to get in there, get my dick wet, etc., etc. When I went to see Elisa next, it was December 23rd. That night, we started talking, and she sensed I was very nervous and shy, and asked me about it. After some coercing, she finally got me to admit what Jake had said to me. She went red and looked away. Finally, after a few awkward moments, she whispered, "If you want to do it." I shyly asked if she did, and she was still for at least a minute, but then she cuddled into me and blushed, saying, "I don't know how." Side note, sex education in our town was horrible. I forgot to mention that. I made her face me. Then I asked if I could start by just touching her. She nodded and looked at me, smiling nervously and blushing, clutching my sleeves as I grabbed and pawed at her big breasts with my hands, feeling them up, squeezing them, everything. She let out happy sighs and told me it felt really nice. As it turns out, she was a huge sucker for nipple play, and with her big areolas, she was in heaven. I played with them for a good while, then I grabbed her ass over her dress and pulled her into my lap, and she started kissing me and straddling as I rubbed her ass. I alternated, playing with her boobs and her butt as much as I could, with her hands on my chest, grinding on my bulge. Finally, she went really red and asked if she should take it off. I nodded wordlessly, unable to speak. She got up and I sat with my legs dangling over the edge of her bed, and she blushed and said, "Don't look." I obediently looked away from her, covering my eyes with my hands until eventually I felt her grab them. When she did, she tilted my head and I looked at her and my jaw nearly hit the floor. She was just in her underwear, and honestly, all I could think was, wow, this girl is truly the most beautiful creature I've ever laid eyes on. I stared and she became self-conscious, but I grabbed her hips and held her close, and I blurted out every compliment I could think of. I told her she was so gorgeous, so flawless. In that moment, I couldn't even see the scars on her thighs or her wrists. Either way, I didn't care. I ran my fingertips along her skin. I laid her down on my bed, and remembering my talks with Jake, I tried the things he mentioned. He said girls loved when you kissed their bellies and their necks, so I started with her neck. She let out loud, cute moans and gripped my head tightly. I moved to her belly and kissed her there, intending to call it a day, but the sounds of her moans were intoxicating, so I explored every inch of her, my hands almost massaging her skin, my lips kissing her from head to toe. She gasped and pulled on my hair every time I hit her really sensitive spots, so I quickly learned where to touch and kiss her. I began to fondle her breasts with my hands, and she quickly took off her bra. I vividly remember staring at her pale, large nipples and how different they looked from what I had seen in the past. Hers were large rather than small little pepperonis. I was entranced by how sensitive they were, how she responded just to me grazing her areola with my fingertips, how she gasped and writhed as I squeezed and kissed. I felt her squirm beneath me as her breathing became sharper, more intense. Then she stopped me and she raised herself a little and pulled down her panties, revealing her soft, warm, soaked womanhood. She told me how I drove her crazy, how she needed me inside of her, how she wanted me to be her first. I quickly took off my pants and gently rubbed her wet pussy, her gasps urging me on. But when my pants came off, my dick just sort of faltered. No matter how hot she was, how beautiful, the little soldier just refused to work. I frantically jerked it off, prayed for a response, but it remained limp. She started to urge me on, asking, no, begging for it, but it only made me more nervous. Suddenly, she sensed something was wrong and she sat up. She gently touched my cheek and asked what was going on with me. I looked away ashamed and told her I couldn't do it. After some gentle prodding from her, I admitted I couldn't get it up. She looked at me so sad, her eyes dropping, and I could see her lip trembling. Am I not pretty enough? Asked the most beautiful girl I had ever seen. I tried to reassure her, but she shuffled away from me, fully blaming herself. I was scared, guys. I was terrified to admit the truth, but I told her. It's not because of you, I said. At this point in my life, I was still very scared that my brother's actions had turned me into a fag, so while I didn't realize that it was because of my subconscious association of sex with negative feelings causing my erectile dysfunction, I did at least recognize that what he did was the root of my floppy problems. I started to cry, and when I told her, it's nothing to do with you, you're the most beautiful girl I've ever seen, I'm the broken one, instantly she hugged me, rubbing my back and asking me what I meant. I admitted to her that I was scared of telling her, scared of her leaving me. She assured me how much she loved me and swore on her life she would stand by me no matter what. Finally, I came out with it. I told her that my brother used to rape me and that I thought because of him molesting me and raping me, I was broken and couldn't do it with her. Elisa never judged me. She never called me a faggot. She cried and rubbed my back and held me, her perfect, pale, naked form pressed against me, and she tearfully kissed my cheek and told me she was so sorry he hurt me, and she said it didn't matter if I couldn't do it, as long as I still loved her. We cried together for a long time, and we laid down under her covers, cuddling, her, still nude, her hand up my shirt, caressing my chest. She reassured me, and she apologized for her insensitivity. When I got ready to go home that night, she gave me my Christmas presents and told me she wanted to see me tomorrow. For a short time, I refused to do anything more than touch her because I felt humiliated, and I was pretty put out about disappointing her sexually. Of course, horniness conquered everything else, and New Year's Eve I found myself in a similar position. I asked my mom if I could spend New Year's Eve at Jake's house, and she said yes, so I immediately went to Elisa's house. We were cuddling on her bed, 2 hours from midnight, and we began to make out. This was unlike any previous time we had kissed. Elisa was taking charge. She was pushing me to go further, and before I knew it, she was naked as the day she was born, lying on her back, begging me to kiss her and touch her. Things proceeded much the same as before, with me kissing every inch of her, except for her pussy. I hadn't learned that you could do that yet. I loved the way her body quivered at my touch. God, every moan that escaped her lips was like heaven to me. But I felt disheartened again as I pulled out my limp dick. I sighed and looked down, but she grabbed my head and asked me to cuddle beside her. As I did, she took my hand, and blushing, she brought it to her soft, smooth mound. It's okay, she said. You can use your hands. I held Elisa close and felt her body shiver in pleasure against me as I rubbed her warm, wet lips. I explored and she guided me to her tight pink hole and held on to me as I pushed my finger inside. It was hard at first, but I eventually found an angle and rhythm that worked and fingered her, listening to her whimper and moan and breathe into my ear, feeling her body writhe in bliss and feeling her hands cling to me. I got hard fingering her, but I knew it would falter if I stopped even for a moment, so I simply pressed on, happy to be able to bring her some pleasure. She let out a particularly loud moan and whined happily, almost purring as she climaxed, and as she finished, I took my hand from her and she buried her face face in my chest, telling me that she loves me immensely and that I was so amazing. We cuddled for a long time and celebrated the new year with a kiss, and as we pulled away, she tentatively reached for my limp dick and started tugging on it very gently. I told her it wouldn't get hard, and she kissed my cheek and whispered, "I just wish I could make you feel as good as I feel." Afterwards, we focused on her pleasure. I fingered her a lot, but I could tell she wanted more. She always tried playing with my dick, and sometimes she would get it to half chub or even fully erect, but it would go soft in her hands. She wrapped her big boobs around it a couple times, but not even that would get it to operate. It was like trying to start a 30-year-old car with 10-year-old gas. Other than the failings in the sex department, our relationship was perfect. We were a lovey-dovey couple, the kind you roll your eyes at when you see them because they can't seem to keep their hands off of each other. Eventually, Jake ran into some troubles of his own. Somehow, he had gotten into a fight with a guy from a different school. It wasn't a big deal. Jake was fine, but he told me it wasn't over. And he was right. We were at the park playing basketball. The girls watched from the bench and we were playing. 4 guys in total and 3 girls watching. 3 big guys came up to us and started causing trouble. Jake tensed up. He said that was the guy, the one in the middle. Tall, brown hair, thick arms, but a bit dim. 3 big guys came up to us and started causing trouble. Jake tensed up. He said that was the guy, the one in the middle. Tall, brown hair, thick arms, but a bit dim. It was his friends that had me concerned. They were big guys, bigger than Jake. They started talking a lot of shit, and Jake told them to fuck off. Things started to heat up, and the guys got in his face. Suddenly, one of them threw a punch. It was 3 against just Jake. I turned to my friends, and I looked back at the girls. The guys and the girls all took off. Only Elisa and I stayed. I watched them throw Jake to the ground, and I charged in. I shoved one to the ground and just started swinging like crazy. I want to say we kicked their asses, and we fought them off like heroes, but truth is, I'd never been in a real fist fight, and Jake was already pretty hurt. They beat the fuck out of us. They beat me so bad, I woke up in a hospital. They broke my nose and cracked 2 ribs. Jake managed to get out of it without getting too badly messed up. But he felt guilty. He and Elisa were right there when I woke up. As she was crying and hugging me and kissing my hand, I saw tears in Jake's eyes. "Why didn't you run?" he asked. I looked him right in the eye and said, "You're my best friend. I'm sorry I couldn't win." Bruce Lee couldn't win against those odds, dude. They talked for a bit and seemed to get along well and agreed that when I'm in better shape they should do a dinner thing. Honestly, the next few weeks weren't too eventful while I healed. The guys who attacked us were satisfied with kicking our asses and left us alone, and Elisa spent most of her time at my house, being my cute little nurse. After I healed, though, our families got together and we did dinner. My mom prodded into Elisa's family life a little too much and kind of looked like an asshole when she did find out why Elisa's parents weren't there, but otherwise, it went smoothly. Sometime later, while at Elisa's house, playing around with photography, she turned to me, blushing. "You know, I've been thinking about our little problem, and I might have an ideal." Boys, that was the night I found out that I was, without a doubt, not gay. She had both of us stripped nude, and I touched her a bit to get her going. Then she told me to lay on my back and just relax. She made out with me a bit, and then she started to kiss down my neck, sending shivers all throughout my body. She pressed her breasts against me as she kissed down my collarbone and licked my nipples, and kissed down my belly, my boner switching on and off at record speeds. She kissed down to half my chub and just rubbed it and kissed it a little. Then she moved on down my thighs. Basically, she just went up and down my body, pausing for kisses and cuddles, not focusing her attention solely on my dick. For me, it was anxiety, nerves, PTSD, and other things combined. She actually brought me to orgasm. As she was sucking my nipple and jerking off my half chub, it suddenly stiffened up and started twitching, and out of nowhere I gasped and let out a loud "oh" as I came all over her hand and myself. She licked it off her hand and wrinkled her nose, but she forced a smile and an as she licked it up, and as a reward for giving my first orgasm not achieved through masturbation, I fingered her and made her come too. This is how she dealt with my erectile dysfunction. She slowly and gradually pleasured me, spending over an hour meticulously making every inch of my body feel incredible. She tried to mount me a few times, but I still kept going limp before penetration could occur. Honestly, it wasn't until summer that it finally happened. I don't remember the build-up much. It wasn't anything too different, but I do remember her getting me to full hardness, then jerking me off and straddling me. She told me just to close my eyes and relax. As I did, I felt her weight shift, and suddenly I felt my tip pressing against her hole, and before my dick had a chance to go limp, she started sliding down on it. She moaned so loudly I was scared her gran would hear, and I gasped as well as I felt the most intense sensation I'd ever experienced in all my life wash over me. The warmth was indescribable, and the tightness. I softened to about a half chub, but immediately things began to stiffen up again, and once inside, I was incapable of going soft. My first time having sex was over in roughly 15 seconds. She bounced up and down on it once, and I moaned loudly and gripped her hips, and the second time, I let out a loud "oh," and I unloaded my cum inside of her. I held her on it, feeling my dick return to half-mast, throbbing inside of her, and she slid off of me and cuddled up. I started panicking because, teen pregnancy, but she rather suspiciously assured me that she would take care of everything and that it was all okay. I was still panicked, but she didn't get pregnant. I won't lie, my ED wasn't magically cured. Sometimes we could have sex, other times my dick just failed. But shortly after losing our hetero virginity together, she asked me rather nervously while at the park alone one day, "Do you want children?" "Elisa, are you pregnant?" She shook her head. "I don't mean now, I mean in the future." I shrugged. I admitted that I would love to have children with her and get married in the future. I immediately knew my answer was a fuck up when she looked away. "I have to go," she said, choking on tears. I grabbed her and hugged her and begged her to tell me what was wrong. Finally, she pushed me away, sobbing, and exclaimed, "I'm not a real woman." Confused, I asked and demanded for her to explain, and she did. She told me through sobs that she was told by a doctor recently that she had a problem in her ovaries and she would never be able to have children. Now, as an adult, I understand adoption is a thing, and I personally think adopting a kid is just as, if not more, precious than birthing one. But back then, I never even thought of it. I knew adoption was a thing, but the idea didn't pop into my head. I wrestled with the dilemma for roughly 10 seconds, and I told her my choice. If I have to choose between having children and being with the person I love most in the world, I choose you, and I always will. She was so happy and relieved to hear it. However, I had to reassure her many times that I would never leave to be with a woman who could bear children. In fact, knowing that she couldn't get pregnant did wonders for our sex life. Without having to worry about condoms, a lot of my ED anxiety wore off. It was still a rare occasion for us to be able to have sex, but when we did, wow. And now we approach the climax of the story. Our relationship grew stronger and stronger. Things just seemed to go amazing. We were so happy together. We planned our wedding and giddily talked about Jake being our best man. But Jake began to run into more of his own troubles. He started getting into drugs. Party drugs mostly. He was also drinking excessively. All in all, he was getting far too involved in the party lifestyle. I was starting to get very concerned with him. He was getting into a lot of trouble with his parents and fighting with them. He started hanging out with a new circle of friends. I told him he should probably relax a little with the drugs and the drinking, but he snapped at me. The first time he'd ever done that. Jake wasn't the best drunk. He was a fighter. Elisa and I started going to parties with him just to look after him. She said she didn't want to see me put in any danger, but I reminded her that Jake was my best friend, and Jake pulled through for me. We went to a house party, and I lost sight of Jake. I thought he went to the backyard where a few stoners were smoking, since he liked to smoke when he drank, so I stupidly told Elisa to wait for a while I went to find him. She hated the smell of pot, so I figured, why expose her to it, right? I started talking to one of the stoners, who was actually a pretty cool acquaintance. He told me Jake was with them for a bit, but went inside to take a dump. I go back inside just in time to see Jake drunkenly stumble to Elisa and slap her cup of beer out of her hands, and he starts screaming at the scrawny jerk next to her. I rush over, asking what happened, but Jake was already tackled him, knocking the whole couch over. I pick Elisa up and drag her to a safe corner. Then I run over to Jake and the host, and two other guys are pulling him off of the scrawny dude. I get between them all and grab Jake myself and ask him what the hell that was about, and he points and says, "I saw him, man. I saw him drop a pill in the drink. He was grabbing at her and shit." Everyone started yelling, but I just said, "Fuck it, it's over," and I pulled Jake and Elisa out of the house. I gave Jake the gayest hug ever and thanked him profusely. He's drunk as hell. He can barely stand, but he reminds me of the beating I took for him. I took him to my house to sleep his hangover off, but it was back to drugs and parties for him. It was sad to watch him spiral, and he continued to get worse. He got a new girlfriend for a time, and Elisa befriended her. One day, while at Elisa's house, cooking dinner for her grandmother, she dropped 2 bombs on me. "Anon, she's getting sick. The doctor said she won't be around for much longer." She began to tremble, but I hugged her close and kissed her and told her it would be okay, and if anything happened, I'd be there for her. She then said, "There's more. Ash, Jake's girlfriend, told me something." "What is it?" He hit her, Anon. She showed me the bruises on her shoulder. He beat her up. Elisa wouldn't lie about something like that, and neither would Ash, but I was still mad. We got into an argument that night, and it took us 2 days to make up. I felt betrayed. Jake was my best friend. He saved Elisa and stood by my side through thick and thin, but he also did something awful. Elisa begged me to talk sense into him. I invited him over a couple days later, and we played some video games, and then I turned the games off and turned to him. "Jake, we need to get serious for a minute." "What is it, buddy?" I hesitated. I remember that very clearly. I remember just looking at him, my mouth hanging open as if trying to speak, but words just wouldn't come out. Not for a long time. Finally, I just came right out and said it. "You beat up Ashley, man." He hung his head in shame, and I continued. I told him what he did wasn't okay. I asked him why he did it, and he said he didn't know. She was just really making him mad, and he had been drinking that night. He swore to me that he'd change, but he didn't. When he hit her again, I made a very difficult decision, and I parted ways with Jake. It wasn't a dramatic thing. We just sort of naturally drifted away. Things changed. We didn't talk much anymore. When we did, it was just small talk. It broke my heart, but we both knew this was the way things had to be. And then piece by piece, my perfect life started to crumble. It was after the new year now, and the snows were starting to clear. I was walking Elisa home from school. She wore a white dress that day with white shoes. I remember how our fingers were locked, how she laughed at my stupid jokes, and how I laughed at hers, how she whispered naughty things in my ears and blushed. We walked into the house and shouted hello to her grandmother. I said hello too, but there was no answer. I asked her if she was out, but Elisa shook her head and pointed to her shoes by the door. She walked through the house. We never planned on checking on her, but the thing is, she had recently got a cat and had taken to leaving the door cracked for the little guy. I was sitting in the living room while Elisa cried out to me in a panicked voice. I rushed over and saw her crying, sitting on her grandmother's bed, frantically shaking the old woman. I'll never forget the sheer terror and pain in her face as she looked at me with her eyes wide and choked out. She won't wake up. Her grandmother had died sometime during the night. By the time Elisa woke up for school that morning, she had already been dead for several hours. At least she lived a long life, they said. At least she died in her sleep, they said. She didn't have to suffer, they said. None of it mattered to Elisa. None of it made her feel any better, and none of it helped fix the void in her heart. I tried to be her rock, but I was pretty devastated too. I loved her gran like she was my own family. Jake showed up at my house the morning of the funeral. He was wearing a suit. He gave me a hug and said another speech I'll never forget. He said, I know I fucked up a lot and I pushed you away. I know I'm not exactly a good person either, but Anon, you're the best friend I've ever had. I'd die for you, man. I know I was an asshole, but if you'd let me, I'd like to come with you and support you and Elisa. I forgave him on the spot. He came with us and he was the rock Elisa and I both needed. He was calm, collected, and he didn't say any of that stupid shit that other people say at funerals. He just made it all so much easier. I begged my parents to let Elisa live with us after the funeral, but instead it was decided that she would live with her next of kin, her aunt and uncle who lived 4 states away. I begged her not to go, especially not now, but she didn't have a choice. Still, we swore to each other to talk every day as much as possible. At first she did, but her replies started to slow. She revealed that her uncle forbade her from having a boyfriend. Sometimes we'd go as long as a month without talking, and when we finally did get in touch, it wasn't a happy conversation. She just kept spiraling. Still, we planned to go to the same college. It would all be okay in college, right? Just another year and a bit to go, right? That was the plan. Our plan, and it wasn't much longer. Contact stopped one day. I didn't hear anything for a week. 1 week became 2. 2 became a month, and eventually it had been 3 months with no contact. Jake and I agreed she was probably just grounded, but I was getting antsy. I felt bad. Jake called me up one night and said, pack your shit. We're gonna go get her, man. I don't care. I'll deck her faggot uncle in the face and we'll bring her to my place and figure something out from there. So I packed some things, and the next morning we got in this car and started driving. I cannot describe the feeling in my stomach on that ride, the knot that had formed. I felt sick. I was in pain. Everything felt wrong. I didn't say a word the entire car ride, and finally we got to her house. After an hour of deliberating, we said fuck it and just walked up to the door and knocked. Her uncle answered, but he didn't recognize us. Is Elisa Sinclair home? The man wrinkled his nose and made an annoyed expression. Is this a joke? I knew right then and there. No. No, 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 no. We were classmates. We really need to talk to her. No, no, please, no. She's been dead for at least 2 months, he said with a huff, as if he was talking about a broken vacuum. He started to close the door on us, but Jake stuck his foot in the way. Excuse me, I didn't catch that. I said we wanted to talk to Elisa. You didn't know? Her uncle sneered. Honestly, my mind went blank. Jake talked to him, and I just stood there in shock. There was yelling and shouting. There wasn't much left of her things, other than some miscellaneous stuff. There was just a necklace I got for her for Christmas, and a suicide note hidden in her school binder. Most of her other things were gone, sold, mostly, or thrown away. Jake took the binder, threatening violence to get it. We pulled over on the side of the road and read it together. I was shaking. My hands trembled so fiercely. Dear Anon, I love you with all my heart. I love you more than anything. You're the most precious person in my life, and I am yours. Or I was supposed to be yours. Body, mind, and soul. I wanted you and no one else to touch me, but there was a classmate. He held me down. He took what was yours and left me broken and dead inside. I can't do this anymore. This body was taken from you, and it's my fault. I wasn't strong enough to protect it. I'm so sorry, Anon. I know you'll hate me forever for letting another man take me. I tried so hard to make it stop, but I wasn't strong enough. My classmates were right. I am just a worthless, pathetic freak and a whore, and you deserve so much better. Thank you for giving me the happiest days of my life, and thank you for letting me believe, even for just a second, that I was worth something more than garbage. Please forgive me. Your beloved, Elisa. I didn't cry when I read it. I turned to Jake and I said 2 words. Find him. Unfortunately, even though we sacrificed our grades to find who did it to her, we never did. Losing Elisa crippled me, but what hurt the most is that I felt betrayed by her. After all the years we spent together, did she really believe that I would turn away from her? Did she think I would hate her for what? Being raped? I tried to kill myself a few times, and Jake spiraled heavily into drugs and alcohol and ended up getting arrested in college as a sex offender. I flunked out of college and moved into a small apartment in the city, occasionally drinking when I could afford it and working as a waiter. I spent my days wondering what happened to yesterday, the days when that pretty blonde was nestled up against me, the days when the worst of my problems was that sometimes my dick was kind of dumb, and I find myself so angry for so many reasons. Angry at myself for being so childish and stupid. Angry at Elisa for killing herself without even talking to me first. Angry at Jake for ruining his life. Angry at the world for destroying the most beautiful things this life had to offer. Just bitter and angry. I had everything, and I am just so broken now. So angry that it's all gone. Some days I have to try really hard to convince myself not to join Elisa in heaven. In ninth grade, she wanted to be an angel for Halloween, but she didn't understand. To me, she was an angel every day of the year. To my Elisa, my sweet, beautiful love. To Jacob, my most loyal friend. Maybe we'll all see each other again someday, be it in heaven or hell. Have a good night, B. I'm going to drink a bottle of wine. Hey guys, it's Dova, and I hope you enjoyed this story. If you did, feel free to leave a like or a comment expressing your feelings or thoughts about the story. Feel free to talk to me, and be sure to subscribe for more stories like this in the future. On another note, I have had a lot of people ask me, like, and by a lot of people I mean a surprising amount for like a channel of my size, like 2,000 subs or like 3,000 subs. And kind of shit quality videos. I don't think they really warrant any kind of monetary reward, but a surprising amount of people have asked me if I had a Patreon. To that I say no, I don't, and I won't be making one anytime soon at least. But if you would like to donate, like, I guess as like a little tip jar, I'll leave my PayPal down in the comments in the description as kind of like a tip jar for reading this story. If you'd like to think of it that way, like maybe you thought, wow, this guy sat here for like an hour and a half and read this story that I didn't want to read, and I got to listen to it. I think he did like blank decent job. Here is what I believe it's worth in a monetary value in terms of a tip. You can do that if you want. I'm by no means asking for money or anything. There just have been people ask me if I had a Patreon, and they said that they'd like to donate or like become a patron or whatever. So if that is something you're interested in, you can do that. By no means don't like feel like I need you to do it or anything. But yeah, my videos don't get monetized by YouTube. If that wasn't like, if the reasons aren't obvious, it's typically because they are kind of fucked up, so YouTube doesn't really monetize them. So I don't make any money from these videos like at all, even though YouTube still puts ads on them, which is like stupid because I wish I could not have ads in the middle of a fucking story if I'm not getting money for it anyways. But YouTube, YouTube likes to fucking cuck me. So anyways, guys, I hope you did like this story, and I hope you like the other videos on my channel. And again, my PayPal is in the description and the comments if you would like to tip. As for my thoughts on this story, I thought I don't know, it kind of seems a little cheesy at parts. Like it kind of seems like a little bit of fantasy fulfillment, but it definitely got me. I don't know if you could hear my voice at the end. It definitely fucked me up. I was like holding back tears just in the end, like letter and like Anon expressing his feelings after the whole ordeal. Anyways, this has been a really fucking long outro. Yeah, but I hope you guys enjoyed, and I hope you guys do subscribe for more videos in the future. This has been Dover, bro. Goodbye, guys.